Okay, this session is going to basically completely shatter, I hope, one of the myths in the Agile space that's really frustrating for me that people still believe it. Well, they believe it because it's almost universally true, but universally true does not mean inherently true. Okay, universally true means like, I don't know, a little over 100 years ago, man universally could not fly. Heavier than air flight did not exist. And then we figured out how to do it. And people in our industry, coaches, consultants, people in general, believe if it hasn't been done, it's not possible. That's a general belief I see all the time. And when somebody explains it is possible, I don't know. I've been called all sorts of things for doing that, actually. So I'll admit this might have a little rant in it. I'm warning you. Because this started out with some people talking about how you have to run experiments when you create features to see if the features are valid or not, if the customer will want them or not. And I remember thinking that that wasn't true, but that is certainly believed. Now, I'm not saying you don't run experiments at times. I'm a big fan of Eric Ries's The Startup Way, and he talks about running experiments all the time. But he's talking about when you have a new product with a new market. There's a big difference between new products and new markets and enhancing existing systems. And most of the work out there is enhancing existing systems. To me, the agile space in general is looking for excuses to fail and justify the low bar that's been set. There's my rant. I see it over and over and over again. And I see when things go wrong, it gets justified. Oh, well, they're doing it wrong. But they're not even really, the promoters aren't even really trying to do it right, in my opinion. So I was thinking about this. You always have to run features. And I remembered, now I'll admit I had an advantage. In the early 80s, a partner of mine, he was a real genius there. Man, this guy was amazing. We built, before 4GLs became even something people were talking about, we built something better than them. We failed because you're two geeks in a garage. You had no idea how to explain things. I've come a long way. What can I say? Some people ask what happened, and I'm not embarrassed to say what it is. I took a lot of personal development courses, including the S training. And what I realized was that as a heavy developer, because believe me, I was a serious developer, left brain, all to myself, introvert, I realized in that session that the system and what I was building wasn't really the important thing, but rather it was how it was being used by the people I was writing it for. And this was a shock to me. And part of the reason it was a shock to me is the reason I got into abstract mathematics, theoretical mathematics, and programming was it was a place I could go in my room and work by myself and create things that I thought had value. It was kind of nice. It was actually really cool. And I was really good at it too. Okay. But when I realized that to really create great value, that only comes with interaction with other people, and it only comes from their perspective, not from my perspective. It's so easy to have things from my own perspective because then when people don't get it, they're wrong, stupid, and I'm smart. Look, it's really simple if they would just look at it my way. We don't say it that way. We say, look, this is how the system works. Of course, I created the system. I know how it works. This imposition of a developer's belief on the customer is so widespread we don't even notice it. In fact, I should have put it in here. I just thought of a thing I made. You've heard the water to the fish, air to the birds, man to themselves. Well, there's another one, the system to the programmer. They don't notice they've created this thing. They think it is the thing. And this is so widespread and so rampant, it's causing a huge amount of problems. Now, what inspired this talk was there was something I did in the 80s that I learned from Fernando Flores. And we talk about this in Paula Stewart in my value coach book, leading by creating value. We talk about how people interact with each other and how they really don't see reality as it is, but they see it in their own mind. In other words, we create a representation of reality in our mind and we use that. And it's really important to understand this to be a good coach. I'm not going to put that into this workshop or this session because this is going to be enough as it is. I assure you, in terms of changing minds and stuff. But what I want to create is that there is a difference between the reality as it exists. Excuse me, and some people would even maybe say there is no reality, but I won't go into that metaphysical aspect either. But we create our perception of reality. Okay. And you've seen this all the time, and then we tend to ignore it. We tend to ignore because it's kind of scary, but it also creates huge possibility. So I had this training back in the 80s. I studied very intensely with this fellow. He was amazing. He's not in the country anymore. He was a political refugee from Chile, and he's gone back to Chile now, Fernando Flores. He's written books, really brilliant, brilliant, brilliant work. I took some intense year-long seminars with him. And what I learned is that people, when they use computer systems, that if you design them from how they expect the computer system to work, it works a lot better. And I've done this for years, and I've built incredibly easy to use software for years when I built it. I'm now more of a consultant, but in the 80s and 90s, I built a dozen or more vertical applications. Like I built a rent a nurse application. I built a used camera gear retail system, hair salon spa system, mortgage control system, financials, everything. It just really was prolific because I had this really cool development system we had built. And I was always impressed with how easy it was to use the stuff I built. And I've been threatening those people in my ACE program to deliver a workshop on it because it is useful. But I'd always thought it was mostly useful around the UX part. I mean, seriously, I would train people in these systems in 15 to 30 minutes, people who never used a computer before. And I'm talking about DOS systems. This was in the 80s. And I'm talking about 80s and 90s. And I'm talking about machines that had 1 meg of memory, okay, and 25 by 80 displays. Okay. Although I did get into touchscreen technology at one time because that was, well, luck and happenstance, but I learned how to use touch in 83, 84. And that helps too, because then people can interact with things in a different way. But then when I heard that it's always expensive and you always have to run experiments to see if something's of value, and I realized, well, wait a moment, I developed over a dozen vertical applications where that was not the case. When somebody says always, you only need one counterexample, but I didn't have just one. I had everything I had done in the 80s and 90s once I had these insights. Everything. I never didn't do this. So I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. Excuse me. That's kind of interesting. And I remember Winston Churchill's, one of my favorite quotes of his is, sometimes men stumble across the truth, but most of the time they pick themselves up as if nothing had happened. So here was some truth, and I wondered, what the hell happened? Why is this prevalent belief that you have to run experiments present when for 15 years, so like, well, no, I'm talking 85, yeah, to about 15 years, I didn't have to do that. Well, first of all, I'm not saying you can always do this. I want to be very clear. Again, if it's a new market, if it's a new customer, then you don't know things as much as you'd like. And running experiments and expecting to fail is a natural course of events. So I'm not contradicting that. Okay, it's one of the reasons I love The Startup Way by Eric Ries, because he talks about what you're really doing. You're not just throwing spaghetti against the wall. You're trying to challenge your assumptions. You're trying to discover what you don't know. The lean startup and the startup way is about challenging assumptions. And people forget, at least I don't think even they are aware of, the number one thing lean is when you actually read Taiichi Ohno's work, when you read like Lean Strategies, which is one of the more recent and best books on lean, what you really discover is lean is about learning. Well, Toyota Kata, all that stuff, all those things. It's really about learning. Of course, it's about learning how to make things better and lower costs and things like that, but it's about learning in small steps. So anyway, I'm going to suggest that in the domain, when you have a customer set and the market is reasonably set and you're trying to move into new areas, I'm not saying you're not enhancing. I'm saying when you're enhancing something, but you know your customers, that the idea that you cannot build things without fairly good certainty of what you're going to build is nonsense and very limiting. Now, I want to be clear about this, and I'll now start. Well, I've started the talk, but I'll actually start using slides a little bit. I had a post where I actually came up with a list, and these were things that people say you can't do. Spending a significant amount of time building features that aren't needed. That's another one. Well, you got to try it because we don't know. Well, that's what this one's about. I'm going to leave that other list up there for you to look at quickly. But this is my rant. None of these are true. None of them. Not inherent. Now, you think about the impact this has on the space. Is it any wonder that Agile has been a, what's the word, mispromise? If these are still true, and you know what really is most distressing, here's rant coming. If you look at LinkedIn on, not a LinkedIn everything, but LinkedIn and, how to improve businesses and things, I would say well more than half are one of two things. They are either justifying why we have problems, sometimes blaming people, etc., or they're about how to fix problems. And what you rarely see, you do see it from some people, like Peter Merrill, Wolfram Mueller, Steve Tendon. You do see there are about a dozen people I know. I'm sure there are more than that, but this is who I know, that are trying to change the system so the problems don't come out. The metaphor for me is we have all these ships with leaks in them, and everybody's trying to teach us how to fix the leaks, or they're explaining the leaks come up because you're using the ships wrong. And very few people are trying to build better ships. And this is the failure in my mind of the promise of Agile. Okay. And this is basically what I'm doing in the Amplio Consultant Educators, my paid for program, trying to change the industry education. I actually think education is overpriced 10 times. 10 times. I literally priced the ACE program at 10% of what you'd expect it to be priced if you looked at it from a content point of view. 120 live hours for over 6 months for $9.95. That's a little sales pitch, but it also is like, hey, why am I paying a 2-day workshop for that I forget after a while? I'm not saying intense workshops aren't good. I'm not saying on-site workshops aren't good or private workshops aren't good. But as general education, our education system is totally broken. Also, how can we be effective? So this is why I do the ACOP. The reason I do the Amplio Community of Practice is trying to create awareness of this, what I call our commitment to ineffectiveness in the Agile space. Okay, end of rant. I don't know, I'll go into it again, but you know me, I can't really keep that promise very well. And I'll admit it. So I'm only going to talk about this first one. I might talk about the others. Basically, in the ACOP, we talk about not the ACOP, in the ACE program, we talk about all of these. And we have talked about some of these in here. Okay. So this is a little background as well, and then I'll get into the heart of the talk. So I was at a conference with Don Reinertsen. I love Don Reinertsen. He's, I don't know, one of my 2-3 top people in the industry because he's so smart. And he will talk to you even when he knows you're wrong, but he doesn't treat you like you're wrong. Okay. And I joke about it, but it's true. In my conversations with Don, we have disagreed many, many, many times. And we've always brought the conversation to a close where we saw who was right. And the score, as far as I can tell, I haven't really counted it up, but if I did, it would be Don Reinertson 100, Al Shalloway 0. In fact, one time years ago, I asked him, I said, Don, why do you like to talk to me? Because I'm always wrong. You're not learning anything from me. And he said, Al, I like talking to you because you want to learn. And I get that. I like talking to people who want to learn. It's fun. It's nice. You like to contribute. So anyway, but at a conference with him, we were pretty tight. And we haven't seen each other much recently, but we were at a conference together. This is about 2010, 2011. And people were debating Scrum versus Kanban. These were the early Kanban conferences. I was big in this with David Anderson, having co-formed Lean Kanban University. And there were different approaches to complexity. That was another argument. In those days it was Jürgen Appello and Dave Snowden. Dave hadn't risen to the top of this Cynefin thing yet. And if somebody said A, somebody said not A, and this was going on like all day long. And we were kibitzing in the back, and he said, these folks have been around zeros and ones too long. And I laughed because that was exactly what I was thinking. People were saying one thing and then they were then saying something else. They were coming up with some other thing, and it was just totally wrong. Sorry about that. There we go. So there's almost always a third option is the thing. Okay. So here we go into the meat of the matter. I'm saying there's a third option. I'm not claiming you can know everything up front. I'm not claiming you know all the details. I'm not claiming you know exactly what to do. Of course you don't. I never have, not all the way. But that doesn't mean you have to create waste in the process. See, one extreme is you don't know, one extreme is you do know, and in the middle is how do you get to know without waste? That's what I'm talking about. So what I had done when I'd read that and when I stumbled across the truth and decided to look at it is I asked myself, what did I do all those years? Now, to be candid, it wasn't an explicit workflow I did. It was something I just did because it made sense to me. So the first thing I did is I came from identifying the critical stakeholders, success criteria, and their constraints. Now, what's interesting is I didn't think about it this way. I just thought about who's important. And I start wording it this way because of my work with Tom Gilb. We've written he's written a lot of things. We've done some things together as well. And there is a resources page on our website, successengineering.works. Go to resources, Tom Gilb pops up. Understand the business the customer is in. I was working in the hair salon business, actually. And this was where this comes from, is that the understand the business the customer is in means why are they? Understand it like you could work there and you could do this. Take the customer's perspective. Whoever's using the system, whoever's affected by the system. Know that systems thinking informs behavior. I don't know how I knew this sort of early on. Oh yeah, I do know how I knew this early on. It's because it was about the same time. I had this brilliant business consultant. Man, this guy was amazing. And he had run some business seminars where we learned Deming. I learned Deming at this time, around 85, 86. And Deming, first and foremost, is a systems thinker. And I'll admit, that took me a little while to really understand. There was one mantra I totally couldn't understand. And that was, he would talk about stop making these enunciations about how, think and be safe and telling the people what to do. And the reason he would say this is if it's the system that's causing their behavior, telling them that they need to be safe, they need to do this, they need to do that is silly because it's really the system they're in that's causing the problem. And I learned that in the 80s. And that was also part of this learning process. Attend to the customer value stream. In other words, how do they work? For some reason, I just naturally knew this. Oh, yeah, I know actually where I learned this. It's kind of interesting. I know what I did, but I'm remembering where I learned this. Is as a consultant, I would go in and I would talk to people. In the early 80s, when I said I mentioned all these different industries I worked in. Like I remember one industry I worked in is public warehousing. Public warehousing is where It's not storage like you rent the space. Rather, you put your stuff in the hands of a company that runs the warehouse for you. This is usually done by businesses where they've got lots and lots, pallets and pallets, tons of stuff to store. So you put it in their front door and then they manage it for you when you want it. You ask for it and they'll bring it out to you. And they have this huge warehouses of this stuff. And somehow I got into this. And I remember being totally amazed. I mean, these guys had thousands and thousands and thousands of items in huge warehouses, and they weren't all automated. And I wonder, how the hell do they do this? And I was amazed how they did it. They were so efficient and so good. Well, efficient was one thing. The way they did it manually had its problems. And when we computerized it, we took a lot of those problems away. But I remember thinking, there's no way I would ever figured out how to do this. I got this real, um, I got this real respect for the customer. These guys know how to do their business. They've been doing it for years. See, respect for the customer. Maybe I need that one in here. Tend to the customer value stream. Respect the customer. You don't see much of that in the Agile space, do you? Oh, they're using the system wrong. Oh, they're idiots. We like to share war stories. Now, I admit, I got some pretty funny war stories about customers doing insane things, and it's funny. But they know their business, and we need to respect that, and we typically don't. Write code to be easily changeable, that it can be built incrementally without waste. This is a book. I've written 2 books on this. I mean, wrote 2 books on this, Design Patterns Explained and Essential Skills for the Agile Developer. If you want training in this, I've got, in my opinion, one of the top 5 people who do this, David Bernstein. To Be Agile is his company. Get in touch with me. I can do it at an architectural level, but I haven't stayed in the coding recently, so I might not be the best down and dirty. Okay, so we're going to go through each of these. That's what this talk is. And I realize that this is what I did. Now I'm taking a simple example here because I got an hour, okay? But the point is, each of these steps provide a concept that keeps us on track. These work together. They're not isolated things. And we don't need to see the full path at the beginning. Only be assured we can see each step as it unfolds. This was something I also learned in the 80s with a lot of this work I did. We sometimes look out ahead of us. Here's the metaphor. Imagine you're in this circle that's a depression. So you're down about 10 feet, but it slowly goes up and rises. And you just see this little wall that also blocks your vision. As you walk, maybe not 10 feet high, but 5 feet. So you can't see out of the pit, but every time you take a step out, you get closer to being able to see a little more over. Life's like that. We don't see the end result, but we can often see a step that gets us closer and another step that gets us closer. And I don't know if I'd call it faith, but maybe it is faith. A faith that if you're moving in the right way and in the right direction, that you will get where you want to go. And that's driven me for a very long time. I mean, some people have made religions around this, I suppose. To me, I'm more spiritual with it. I'm not, no judgment here. I think anybody's approach, as long as it helps them and doesn't hurt other people, is a good thing. Whether you call it spiritual or religious, I don't care. But this is kind of a faith, a belief. Okay, so let's come from identifying the critical stakeholders' value. So let me give you the scenario. The scenario was I was in the hair salon business with this, okay? I had gotten into a partnership with a distributor of hair salon products, okay? I had already demonstrated that I had one of the best hair salon products written, and it so happens that we had a mutual, you remember this business consultant I mentioned? It turns out he and I'd gotten to be close friends, and he had been in partnership with this hair salon distributor. So they found out about me through him, and what the distributor liked was that I understood Deming and I understood systems thinking and I understood education. So he wanted me to take my system. I remember calling it Basic Touch at the time because you could use touch screens or you could use the keyboard or any other number of things. Very easy to use. He thought if we did it right, we could increase retail sales of the hair salons and spots. And we were talking top end, like Aveda, best in breed of areas. He had quite a few clients, and We had at one point, I think, ended up with about 100. I was only there for a couple of years, but we ended up with about 100 different businesses, more than, like Avedo's big. They had a lot of people, but we worked with them and others. And these were spas, day spas, and high-end salons. And he, of course, wanted this to happen because he sold retail. He sold the products that they were selling. So he saw, wow, we can almost give the software away. And if it increases the customer sales, it'll increase our sales. This is what's called a win-win-win. Win to us, win to the salons, and win to the customers if they get the good product. So these are our customers. These are our stakeholders, the owners of the salons and spas, the managers. These are the people at the front desk. Now, I'm not talking about spas like, Great Clips or things like that. I'm talking about, look in Yelp, the top end. These were the people we were working with. Service providers, people who gave haircuts, any kind of hair service, manicures, etc. Those were our basic stakeholders. So I knew those are the people we were involved in. Understand the business, the customer is it. Now, here was the cool thing. This guy, my distributor partner, he literally ran a school for salons. We would meet, I can't remember if it was every 3 months or every 6 months. I think it was 6 months. He would have a 2-day event. He'd bring everybody in and he would tell them how to run their salon better. And I think it was free. Why? Because he wanted to sell more products. If they were successful, he'd be successful. And guess what? I was the IT guy. So I would talk to them about computer systems, whether it was our system or somebody else's system. I would talk to them about inventory control because I knew Deming. I would talk to them about all sorts of things. And in the process, I got to know the hair salon business pretty much better than anybody else. He even had, my partner had bought he opened a hair salon where his company was because it was kind of a test case. And I would go in there and I would see how it worked. And I'd been selling to salons for a couple of years by this point. I knew salons about as well as anybody. Seriously, I was actually one of the top salon consultants in the world by this point. So I knew the business. It's got mostly fixed costs. Again, these aren't the rent-a-stylist places. Okay, these were high-end, usually under salary. Yeah, they had commissions and things like that. Retail was a missed opportunity. It was basically about 4% at the time. In other words, if you did $100 in services, they were doing about $4 in retail. Okay. Take the customer's perspective. Is that a 6 or a 9? It depends. But think about this. When does 10 come before 9A, except in a expletive deleted, I caught myself, computer system? This makes no sense. What about 7, 10, 24? Makes no sense. What about if you're entering in a social security number and you type in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and they say it's improperly formatted? Wait a moment, computer, you know it's a social security number. You put the dashes in. I mean, you think about how systems behave, and it's absurd. See, what happens is you create a system that people now must understand instead of it working like you did. Now, let me show you something here. This is the slide deck for my presentations. Now, let me see. Do you see this is slide 32 right here? And I'm at a certain magnification. Now, if I say to zoom in, what would you expect to happen? What did you expect? 32 would still be there, but I would expand and see it closer? Doesn't that make sense? Wouldn't anybody who didn't know PowerPoint already expect that? Those of you who know PowerPoint know it doesn't do that at all. See, as I expand, what happened? Why did it do that? Or if I zoom out, I'd still expect 32 to be there. Now, this is not rocket science. I was doing this. I was having things like this where you zoomed out and zoomed in behave the way you'd expect. Back in the 80s on a 1 meg machine, I didn't even have 1 meg. About 300K of that was taken up by the operating system. Our big drives, boy, I remember when I found this amazing computer in the mid 90s. Oh, I finally found my dream machine. It's only $1,000. It's got 1 meg of memory and 10 meg of hard drive. I was so happy. Power. So don't tell me this couldn't be done, because I did it on dinky machines compared to now. Okay. Now, I'm not trying to say how great I was. I was pretty great. Okay, I'll take the kudos. But I used the approach that works. You do what they expect. You don't try to anticipate what they want. That's a big thing. I'm actually starting the UX course later this week. And I'm going to talk about that. See, people try to anticipate. You can't anticipate what a customer is going to do. I'm sorry. But you can respond in an intelligent way. And systems don't respond in intelligent ways. I used to say if a person interacted with another person the way computers interact with people, they'd be punched out within 10 minutes. And somebody said, Al, that is absolutely wrong. It would be only 2 minutes. I mean, we're so inured to this. We don't even notice it. Horrible software to computer users. I'll add that to the fish example. So the customer's perspective, well, pay attention to it. This causes loss of trust in the system. See, my wife, we've been together 36 years, and she knows computers a little bit. We've been called the high tech, high touch. She was a psychologist, psychotherapist, not therapist, but school counselor. She's got a couple of master's degrees in that. Ex-massage therapist. You know me, I'm high tech. Uh, and I mean, one time I used to always do her email, and then I found out she knew how to do email because of a conversation with a business worker. And I asked her, I said, honey, why have I been doing your email for you? And she said, because it's easier. Kind of sums up part of our relationship too. She's so cute. She gets away with a lot of stuff. But the point is, she's always asking me, why is the system doing this? I said, I have no clue. It's just poorly designed. And it confuses her. She's totally confused. And I don't blame her for being confused. I know it because I've been in these systems so long. I know it just happens. It adds to cognitive overload. See, we put all this stuff on people and then we wonder why they act the way they do. We're doing it. There's no reason for this. Well, there are reasons. It's called arrogant left-brain people who know they're right and not paying to the customers, not knowing how to use things. But if I said that, people will get upset at me. Okay. So blot that out. I didn't say that. True or not? Okay. No, systems thinking informs behavior. What do I mean by this? You can define this, excuse me, you can see this yourself. When have you ever been working in a situation where you are hamstrung by the way the company was working, by the people they had, by the way the people were organized? By maybe you had tests offshore if you're a developer and you couldn't get a hold of those people. Or maybe your product owner is in town one day a month and you're trying to get requirements from them and you don't know what the requirements are. This is a key concept that's not in the manifesto. It's not in Scrum. It's not in SAFe. It's not in Agile in general. When I say it's not in, I don't mean you can't add it. I mean, if you look at how people behave, it's not there. It's like, I can't hear what you're saying. What you're doing speaks too loudly. See, I am a great believer in empiricism. You probably heard me rant about it, but only when it's all you got. I'm not a great believer in empiricism by itself. You need theory as well. Deming talks about theory by itself is useless, but empiricism by itself is expensive. That's why I talk about verifiable first principles, meaning you can verify it. That's another issue. But the point here is if you know systems inform behavior, by the way, the culture you're in of the company is part of the system. That informs. People recognize that. If you recognize it, then that means you could change the system to change the behavior. Whoa, what a thought. So if we've got these problems, like we don't have the right retail, how can we change the system to get more retail sales? Oh, that's an interesting idea. The problems we occur have more to do with the behavior. Systems have more to do with the behavior we get than the people. In other words, the behavior we see is due more to the system than the people. It's not worded so well. Consider culture. Okay. Tend to the customer value stream. What do I mean by this? Well, this is getting to be well known, thank goodness. Customer value stream is the series of steps the customer takes to create value. Now, you hear a lot about value streams. These are the value streams they take, what I just mentioned. And there's development value streams. That's what most people, when they talk about value streams, they're talking about the value stream of the development group that creates those. There are also operations value streams. These are the value streams that set up the infrastructure, ops. As how do I set this up? There's business enabling value streams like maybe HR and sales. And all of these are on the right are called operational value streams. Sorry for operations and operational being similar, but that's the way it is. I didn't come up with the term operational value stream, but operations is also an existing term. And all of these are in the context of critical stakeholders, those people who are responsible for the whole system. Okay. Now, another way to look at this is we're saying value streams does more than provide a way to manage them. Value streams can align people, especially in development, but can align customers, the users of the system as well, and seeing the needs of people in multiple value streams. Remember I mentioned the owner, the manager, and the stylist or hair people or nails, manicures. How do we align them? This is all important. Seeing the relationships between these are all important because we're in a system. Just to give you a quick example, see, there's a system and people go in and out of the system. Okay, in other words, if you've got like something with, say, Fidelity Investment, then you set up an account. Well, sometimes you're typing and sometimes you're looking around for your papers, and sometimes you're typing and sometimes you're looking around for your papers. Well, look at what the Apple did, what Apple did, Steve Jobs with the iPod, excuse me, the iPod. He combined different kinds of music, like how do I get it? How do I listen to it? How do I organize it? You're not always in the system, or you're in different systems. That's what we mean. Now, this is the customer journey. This whole path is the customer journey. And sometimes it's in the system and sometimes it's outside of the system. An example I like to use, I don't have this exact refrigerator model, but I have something like it. In my garage, I have a refrigerator that's got a door and door. It's really cool. In other words, you can open this panel with this one closed and you can get drinks out. This is really cool. Why? Because it's sometimes hot in my garage. I don't want to lose all the cold air, but I can open this and get a drink out. Or my kids, who are adult kids, can open it and get a beer out. And I don't lose all that. It's a great storage thing. I changed how I stock. I actually have changed how I buy things because I have this. Because I make it easy to get to milk and stuff. I usually buy milk in a bit more bulk than I used to. See, the system can change my behavior to the better. And I never thought about this. I was just in a grocery store, in like a place like Home Depot, and I'm walking around and I see this. I say, whoa, what a cool idea. No pun intended. Okay, so write code to be equally changeable. I'm not going to go into this as technical. Change is inherent. We can account for it. It does not need to be costly to do this. The standard way of doing this is building frameworks to accommodate change, to build it in. That's the wrong way to do it. Okay, the way you do it is know it's going to change and you write your code to be changeable. But that's a whole longer conversation. Okay, so what did I do? What did I actually use? I've given you those pieces. Well, let's walk through what I did. Identify the missed revenue. See, I'm going to have step one, come from the value. Identified the missed revenue opportunity. 4% on average was what was there of retail. I knew it could be higher. Actually, my partner knew it could be higher. Staff didn't like to sell. They were artistes. If you talk to the managers, the owners, both of them would complain about, oh, our stylists don't like to sell retail. They like to provide services. Retail is you're a Sears salesman. They're not Sears salesmen. They're artistes. They provide really top quality value. That was their attitude. Now, by the way, this has changed to some extent, and I think maybe we had something to do with it. I'm talking about in the 90s. This was the way it was with a lot of high places. Now, Aveda was an exception. One of the reasons Aveda had gotten in with us is they really knew how to run salons and do services, really brilliant. But mostly people didn't. So we knew that was where it was. That was the problem. Those were our main people. Retail represents a 50% profit margin. It did back then. I'm not sure if it does now. With Amazon and all that, you can get access to you get access to stuff a lot less expensive. But then if you pay $50 for something, it was costing the salon $25. Huge opportunity. Staff like to provide value. Okay, so they had this attitude about being artistes, but let me tell you, good hair salon, good. And I had a lot of friends in the industry by this time too. They loved to serve. They loved to interact with clients. They loved to make a difference with people. These are some of the most service-oriented people I'd ever been with. I loved being in this industry. Okay. And at all levels and across the board, this was a place. And you can imagine, because you're with people and interacting with people all the time, there's a real joy to it. So I knew they liked to provide value, but they were against selling. Do you get that? They could be against selling while they wanted to provide value. So we got this idea. Nobody told us. I want to be very clear about this. Not one salon owner or manager said, is there a way to write a report so we could help staff shift from being selling to servicing? No, they didn't know Deming. They didn't know systems informed behavior. They didn't see this. They just bemoaned that the retail was too low. But again, one of the reasons I was brought into this partnership was because he knew I knew Deming, and he knew Deming, and he knew systems informed behavior. So we got this idea, what if you had a report that helps staff provide value, knowing they like to provide value? What would happen? So I wrote this report. By the way, this report, I can't remember how long it took me. It's probably a week or two. It didn't take much longer than that. I had written the system, so I knew it. I knew the business. I knew what was needed. I wrote it. So what does seamlessly mean? Okay. Seamlessly means no effort. See, if we had them to go to, we're going to send you to a day workshop so you know how to sell product. No, they knew what the product did. If those of you aren't familiar, when hair color is done or perms are done, you're doing something fundamentally to the physical chemical makeup of your hair. And if you don't treat it properly, bad things happen. Okay. So product's important, and not everybody appreciates this, how product is important. And sure, people would talk about product maybe if they did a perm for the first person, but we wanted to include the seamlessly. So here's what we did. By the way, we didn't ask them how to do this. We just looked at the way they worked. The high-end salons were usually reasonably booked, so they knew who was coming in. We took advantage of that. We said, well, the best way. So what we did is we reverse engineered it. In other words, well, what would be great is a salon staff member comes in and on their chair, because they each had their own chair, they're each stationed, on their chair was a list of who's coming in that day. Not like a report one thing, but like each person coming in was on a separate page or pages if it took more than one page. And the top one was the next person coming in. And the person after that was the next person coming in. And the person after that was on the chair when they walked in. And it said, here's their service for today. And here's what you sold them, their whole history. Here's what the service they had last. Here's their whole history of products. Here's what looks like it's past due, because we knew what products, how long they lasted, things like that. We figured all this out. It was real easy to put in. It's called using a database with the right information, makes it all there. Programming was pretty easy. What if they walked in with that? Now, how much training would it take? Look, when they come in, it's in order. Just when you come in, take these, put them someplace on your station you like, then take the top one off. And by the way, if somebody was a walk-in, they would just, when they walked in and the appointment was booked, they would print out that person right then and there and give it to them and let the staff know they'd walk it back. So they'd always have this. And look, you can see what they need, what will make the services you're providing better. Just recommend what makes sense for them. Now, the artists loved this. Why? Because it made a difference immediately to their clients. It took virtually no effort. So you don't get resistance to change when it makes things better and it doesn't take any effort. You get a resistance when it's imposed and it takes effort and there's a learning curve. The training for this was about 15 minutes to the owner, about 15 minutes to the managers, and about 5 minutes to each of the stylists. That's all. Now, I knew how to code well, so I did that one, but I'm not talking about it. So what happened? What was the result of this? Retail sales increased by 9%, from 4% to 13% on average within 2 weeks. Some of them immediate, some of them it showed up the next day. That's pretty dramatic. Week or two of my time, 100 companies, retail sales. That means profit margins increased by 4.5%. Customers and staff were happier. This wasn't the one-off. This was just a real simple example. Okay, this is what I used to do in the 80s and 90s. What I'm actually doing now in my program with the ACE is then in 2000 to about, I don't know, 2012, that's when I got into the consulting. And then I looked at what we did at Net Objectives. See, there's a lot of misunderstanding now in process as well. This is product development. But how do you work with management? How do you work with executives and all that? Well, we were very successful with this at Net Objectives. And I know some other companies are. What is it? Leading Agile, Mike Cottenmeyer in Atlanta. Dennis Stevens used to be there. I now know Dennis has gone off on his own. But there are companies, other consulting companies that do this. Net Objectives was extremely successful, but we weren't the only ones. And so what I'm describing here from a product management point of view is just as true for executive and management and how to run an organization. Few people are doing it, but it doesn't mean it's not possible. And yes, some management, some executives are so hopeless, you'll never get them off the ground. Stop working with them. It's like selling meteors to a dinosaur. Waste your time and irritates the dinosaur. I got that from Chet Holmes. I love it. Okay. This is impressive. Okay. So I didn't mean this to be just a full talk, but I did. So now I'm up for questions. Hopefully that was clear enough that you understood what was going on. So, you can unmute yourself and ask questions, either about any of the programs I offer or about what happened and how we did this. That's right. They do that, Thomas. Now, the systems in the early days weren't very sophisticated. Actually, the history of hair salon business is they used to use restaurant software. The restaurant software moved into the hair salon business because there were a lot of similarities. And then when my partner and I started doing this, they kind of, believe me, other distributors noticed. And I'd done other things also in the hair salon business. There are a lot of, I got my imprint on the hair salon business. It's kind of funny, but that's another conversation.
I have a question.
Yeah, please, Harold.
So you recommended Fernando Flores. I have been wanting to read or study his work for a very long time. And I noticed he wrote one of his books about computers with Terry Winograd.
Yeah,
And
I'm not that familiar with that book. I have a copy. I never read that book. But he
I
also
know,
has a book called, he has a book called Conversations for Action, which is where I got his stuff from. But I'm sorry, keep going. Shouldn't interrupt it.
I just got that book too. But you, what I really love about so much of your work and where you're going is you brought in the design patterns, but not just the patterns, but the philosophy
Yeah.
behind it with Christopher Alexander, and it just seems like there's some touch of design. Winograd was a designer, which is related very much to architecture and
Yes.
how you're thinking about all these things. And I'm just trying to connect the dots because you haven't mentioned Christopher Alexander at all. You just mentioned
Oh,
Pat.
well, it's interesting. Somebody wrote a post this morning about how he's reading Don Reinertson's Principles of Product Development Flow, which is one of my top 4 books recommended. And my other 3 books that I've recommended is actually, one of them is by Ryan Holiday, called The Obstacle is the Way, which is actually about Stoicism. Another one is um, the timeless way of building. And the third one is critical the choice by Ellie Goldratt. And I started thinking about this. I said, why are these my top four? Because they're each of them are a top in their field. And the reason I'll just take the Flow book, Don Reinertson. He talks principles of product development flow, second generation lean product development. The clue there is flow is in the title and lean is in the subtitle. Flow is that book is just absolutely brilliant. It's 15 years old, but Don is typically about 30 years ahead of the industry, so it's still ahead of its time. It goes through a lot of the principles, like 170 plus some number of principles. What's flow? How do you do it? And all that. It's very good from how you do things. Okay. So why do I have something like the choice? Well, that's about critical thinking. We don't do much critical thinking. It gets me irritated. I've got to actually back off the personal irritation. But like yesterday, I saw somebody was talking about like Scrum. Are you sure if you're having troubles with Scrum, have you read the guide? Yes, most people have read the guide. I've done surveys. And are you sure you're working in a complex system? Yes, if you're in product development, you're in a complex system. But the implication that if you're not in a complex system, Scrum won't work well is ridiculous. It'll be even better in a simple system. It still won't work so well because it doesn't have quick enough feedback, but that's another issue. The level of critical thinking is so low, and that's why I like the choice. It's about critical thinking. How do you think? How do you approach problems? Now, so I got timeless way building, which is about the system approach. I've got the choice, which is about thinking. I've got principles of product development flow. What the hell is a book on stoicism doing here? Well, I brought this up, Harold, because you're alluding to some of it. How you be and how you approach problems is just as important as working on the right problem in the right way. And Stoicism, the way Ryan Holiday explains it, is very useful for that. By the obstacle is the way he's paraphrasing something from Marcus Aurelius, where the obstacles don't stop us. We actually start focusing on them. The obstacle is the way. We look at it, we go through it. So yeah, so this is basically what I work on. This is these different aspects. It's unfortunate to me that the Agile space and the Agile methods have pretty much ignored people, which is, whoa, how do they say it's all important about people. But no, they expect you here, follow this and it'll work. That's not people. People will resist following. Anyway, should leave the last few minutes we have for more questions. Yeah, Harold.
Just I have not dived down into the Stoicism. I've just found that every one of your recommendations philosophically has been really, really powerful. And I actually really enjoy your ranting. I think it's one of the best value offerings you have because there's so much broken.
Watch out, people. Blame him.
Well, there's so much broken in the conversation. And I actually think The Choice is probably one of the most important books Agilists should just read because it's easy.
Oh, yeah.
It's short, but it's axiomatic.
Yes.
Awfully axiomatic. And it just makes my some of the people that are leading conversations just go empiricism, 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 and they have the capacity to actually engage their noggin so that they can inspect that concept and see how it's broken to be absolutist on this. So
yeah,
this is one of the most important conversations that they're not having.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I put up this. That's why I put up this first slide. Here, let me just get to the first slide the easiest way. None of these are true. These are not inherent. Yet you see people talking about them as if they're inherent, and it's due to lack of critical thinking. Now, if you want to learn about the quick way of learning about flow, it's his daughter's book, Principles of Flow. I can't even remember the title. That's also a great book because it's a super quick read. So if you look up Efrat Goldratt, I think.
She wrote a book by herself?
Well, yeah, she did. So she was the co-author. She was co-author with her dad.
And The Choice, but it's mostly coming from her voice, which makes it even more powerful.
Yeah. So Rules of Flow. Okay, so this is written by his daughter. See, F. Rut Goldratt Ashline. I'm sorry, I forgot her name. This is great because it's a 2-hour read. I'm not a very quick reader, but you'll get the whole essence of it. There's so many things that are missing in Agile that are in this book that I've been doing for years, and that's the problem. There's still things that at Net Objectives we did back in 2007, 2008 that were essential and are still not out in the Agile space. And it's just absurd. It's just absurd to me. And that's what drives me sometimes is the absurdity of it and the righteousness of it. Anyway, we still got time for a couple more questions. Yeah, if you read The Timeless Way of Building and really study it, and it takes some studying, and it's something we do talk about a lot in the ACE program, it will change your way of looking at systems and design forever. It is one of those things that lets you know that the way we build systems from the pieces up is wrong. It's inherently impossible to build good systems by combining teams and making them a whole. By the way, remember the zeros and ones. It doesn't mean you got to go from the top and do it down. It also doesn't mean you go top down and bottom up. It doesn't mean any of those stuff. It means you look at value streams.
Well, I have one more question about that.
Fine, Harold. Nobody else is raising their hand. You get to go.
Well, the reading Christopher Alexander was terrifying to me because it seemed so imposing. So for like 20 years or so, I kept putting it off until you helped me actually dive into it. And the timeless way of building is so powerful, even if you don't go into the patterns. But his overarching philosophy is so profound, and it deserves multiple readings. And it just changed my whole way of thinking.
Yeah.
But what I noticed when I started listening to interviews on YouTube and people talking about Christopher Alexander's work is that he went even like way beyond it with his final 4-volume set, which I bought the first 2 volumes, and it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's the nature of order.
Yeah. The thing with Alexander, I read it more out of, I have an interest in architecture. When I was in high school, I wasn't sure if I was going to go into architecture. I was going to go into computers. I eventually decided I like computers better. And it's kind of actually cool that people I read when I was in like 10th, 11th, 12th grade were people in the MIT um, AI lab, which I actually didn't go there. I ended up going to the double E department, computer science. But it was kind of cool that I ended up there. And I knew I liked building things and helping things. Okay. Anyway, any other questions? We're at time, but I don't mind staying a minute or two if there are other questions. Otherwise, we'll close this. Yeah, Bill.
Yeah, I just have to get my stuff for a second. Look, one of the issues that we have as far as people not being able to handle critical things, thinking is that with all the pressures, cognitive pressures out there, whether it's overload, et cetera, people are operating out of system one, like Kahneman said.
That's correct.
You got to
Yes.
be able to think and be in systems two to be able to start processing critical thinking. So it's this issue that we have. Yeah, we'd like to, but you know what? We just don't have the capacity to have the cognitive load to be able to address it that way.
I'm
That's
really
it.
glad you brought this up because this is something I'm actually trying to address in the ACE program. And this is part of that. You have to attend to how people be, how they are. This idea that people want to spend time improving is not true. It just isn't. I learned this when I started studying Toyota. See, I thought, because I'm projecting myself on other people, that when people went to Toyota, they would love to be able to give suggestions. They would love to be able to improve. And the reality was just the opposite. When they would talk about what was the onboarding process when they hired people. And the biggest part of the onboarding process was they told them, you must improve your work, and that's up to you. We're not going to tell you how to do it. And you saw these new people coming in, and they didn't want to do it. But eventually that became part of the culture. So in the Agile space, you really have to look at it. What is the power of a good coach? What is the power of a good consultant? It's not sitting back, letting them figure it out. Zeros and ones. That doesn't mean you tell them what to do. See, for some reason, if you the two options are not you sit back and tell them what to do and let them figure it out, or you tell them what to do. No. See, I'd had this experience in the 80s with this business consultant I mentioned. I took this year-long program with him. We met once a month for a weekend. And what I noticed was I could almost tell what he was going to say next. This guy was brilliant. He was espousing brilliant stuff. But what I also noticed is I'd have no idea he was going to say that except for all the stuff he'd said in the past. In other words, it wasn't I knew this before I went in. I didn't know any of it before I went in. But he would ask questions and talk in such a way that I could take it a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. So he never told me, but I was learning because of his presence. See, that's what good coaching is. You let people discover it. And this is why empiricism by itself is so deadly. Because without theory, verifiable theory, people don't believe things anyway. I've talked about this. I just did a recent session on it with Semmelweis, where he had evidence even, but nobody believed him about curing, stopping mortality, infant death, and the mother's death. So Agile has gone into this. There is no theory. We're in a complex adaptive systems. Knevin is like, we can't understand. And it's like, no, it's all there is. This is the choice. Why the choice is so important. He talks about inherent simplicity, that there are things down there. And yes, you don't know them all at any one time. The fact that there are forces there doesn't mean you see the forces, but it means they're there. Which means if you deal with what you see, the things you didn't see become apparent. So you're always learning, which means you're always making progress. Let's put this in the metaphor of the ship. Let's say you've got hull leaking, water's coming in, and you can see I've got a leak here and I've got a leak here. And I fix one leak and that helps, but I'm still sinking. I fix another leak and shit, water's still coming in. See, that one that was leaking I didn't see is like what complexity does. It obscures things. We don't see them. But now that I've removed what we do see, I can see what I don't see. And this is important. We want to remove what we see so we can see what we don't see. We want to be talking about it. We want to take advantage of what we don't know. And a good coach will do this. This is what Paula Stewart and I's book, Being an Effective Value Coach, Leading by Creating Value, talks a lot about. It's based a lot on Flores's work is in there a lot. Okay. The ACE program is in there a lot. That's why it's got an integrated coaching and consulting workshop in it. Now I'm decided to put this UX workshop. I barely touched the surface here with this thing. I talked about how I used it, but how to make this mind shift. I remember what happened. I remember exactly where I was sitting and what I was thinking. It's kind of weird. Do you ever get this? You can remember some event that you just remember the people around. I don't have that many of these I remember. I can actually remember when I got married to my wife, the way we were looking at each other. That was a dramatic event. But I also remember this one. This was a technical dramatic event. And I had this huge insight that forever flipped my view of what computers should be. And that's what I'm going to be teaching, by the way, not here, but in the ACE program. Anyway, I'm going to close this off. Thanks so much. I think we need to start challenging that these are there because they're not. And I'm going to keep trying to do things I can in this program and make recordings available. But again, if you're really serious, I invite you to join my program where it doesn't have to be intense. I actually realized something the other day that some people don't join it because, oh my goodness, 120 hours over 6 months. No, you do what you want. You learn what you want. You get engaged when you want. And when you have problems, you come and you say, Al, I'm having this problem. We spend some time on those as well. So it's whatever level you want. Anyway, that invitation is always open. It's a program you join anytime. I've actually finally got an onboarding process, so you're not totally left to your own. Thanks for being here. I don't know what I'm doing next week, but I'll figure it out and I'll send a note out when I put this up available. Appreciate your support. Take care.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Al.
Thanks, Al.
Welcome.
Thanks a lot.